I have the great pleasure of hosting Professor Robin Hanson. So, Professor Hanson, thank you so much for your time and for doing this podcast.
Nice to meet you. I don't know much about you. I don't know if your viewers know more than I do, but who are you?
Yes, so my name is Hrvoje. I come from Croatia, but I study in Vienna. So my research basically is at the intersection of artificial intelligence and quantum computation. Right now, I'm at Harvard, where I'm working on my PhD thesis.
In which department?
In physics department in quantum science and engineering.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're
Yes.
doing
So
AI? AI in the physics department?
right. So basically, I'm working on quantum machine learning.
Well, I at least remember that basic search is quadratically faster in quantum algorithms, and of course, much of AI is search, but I don't know if it actually translates into a speed up much there. But I mean, AI is such a abstract search space. I don't know if that helps you really much in doing it. But I guess when people actually have large quantum computers, I guess they'll start to figure that out. But they're a ways away from that now. So one interesting fact about computers over the last half century or so is that the advances in algorithms are typically comparable to the advances in hardware, suggesting that you basically need hardware to search the space of algorithms. That is, until hardware got big enough, there's algorithms that require, say, large fixed costs. You can't even try them very much to see how well they work. So you might have thought, you could just do all the algorithm work way ahead of time before you actually had all the compute power. But apparently, it is remarkably close, the rate at which algorithms improve and the rate at which hardware improves. So that suggests that we really won't know what we can do with quantum computers until we just have some big ones. And you won't be able to say much about how much more efficient they'll get.
What do you think is the greatest existential risk we are facing right now?
Well, existential is a much harder thing to judge. That is, there are very few processes that would quickly lead to extinction. Extinction is a potential endpoint along many paths, but basically a lot of things have to go wrong before extinction happens. Just I don't really believe many scenarios with a short path to extinction. So it's easier to think about various risks that could get big, but I just find it very hard to judge what might lead to extinction because there's just, again, so many things have to go wrong for that. But I do have some big worries. So I guess, even thinking of some, huge world war or a huge pandemic or something, it's quite unlikely those would really kill everybody off. They could set us back a while, but we are on such a rapid tear compared to cosmological times that mere setbacks in time of 10,000 years or something are hardly anything, right? So then maybe you're more worried about a setback that would then cause another setback. And I guess you really want to worry, well, what are the kinds of things that could go wrong? So I guess I worry a bit more about maybe a totalitarian lockdown or something, a world government or world culture that sort of wasn't so crashed that it couldn't exert influence, but that its influence was exerted to sort of preserve and prevent growth and change.
Do you think that humanity will ever achieve a so-called Kardashev type 1 or type 2 civilizations?
Well, I mean, I think we have a good chance of going very far. That is, I mean, I guess, but it's hard to imagine, say, our conquering the solar system without also conquering the galaxy. I mean, that is, but I think that might be the scale at which, if we were going to do it, we would lock down and prevent farther growth. So it is noteworthy that, say, in the last half century or so, the world has merged many national cultures into an elite monoculture. And people like the fact that this world monoculture is making many collective choices together out of shared values without resorting to war as often. And they like sort of being a single world culture and world community. That's reassuring and comforting to many people, and they would like that to continue. But the day a day colony probe leaves from our solar system off to another solar system, the day it succeeds in getting there and growing is the end of that. That is, they will just diverge, and the descendants of that may well very come back here to contest control with us, and we would not be making collective choices across the scale of the universe. And I think that'll be a big moment of pause. I think there's actually a pretty big contingent that would like to prevent that, because they'd like us all to stay unified together. And so we might then stay within the solar system, because that's a scale at which we can, communicate fast enough to do shared discussion, and where anybody who deviates can be squashed pretty easy. But when you go to other stars, that ends.
Right. And how do you see the relationship between humans and post-human intelligence in the future?
I mean, so far, in the last million years, say, most of our evolution has been cultural, and we have spun off different cultures that advance to different degrees and gain different powers. We've remained having backward cultures that tend to move to the periphery and, somewhat hide in the mountains or jungle or whatever to protect themselves from the larger, stronger cultures. But they haven't been extinguished exactly, but they've been pushed aside. And so I guess that looks to me the most likely path in the future, that some of our descendants will grow and advance and gain capabilities, and others will choose not to. And then they will be pushed aside to the margins. But, for a while, of course, this is in millions of years, that may not last, but, it's lasted for, say, 10,000 years lately.
Mhm. And do you believe that in scenario that humanity will eventually merge with technology in the future, or will we remain just biological distinct?
Well, so far, we have embraced change in ourselves, in our cultures. You might say, well, the human body hasn't changed much, but that's because we couldn't change it much. I think when we can, we will. And I also think that we can port ourselves to other hardware, we will do that. So I would just predict in the longer run, we will just explore all of the possibilities available in terms of our descendants. And then I guess the main question is, how well will our different descendants get along with each other? But some of them will certainly merge with machines or be machines, or however you want to describe it. Many of them certainly would, uh, but not necessarily all. In say a million year time scale, that seems really safe prediction.
So what do you think will be the defining legacy of the human species in the long-term cosmic context?
Well, I think the options are pretty stark. We could sort of lock down at some smaller scale, like on Earth today, or perhaps in the solar system. Or if we spread out across the stars, then we could become what I've called a grabby alien civilization spreading across millions of galaxies. Uh, so once the process of spreading out and having separate sources of evolution and competition gets going, then it's going to be really hard to stop that. And so then it would just keep spreading. Um, and so the points at which it might be stopped are, say, before we leave Earth or before we leave the solar system.
What are your thoughts on the feasibility of human brain emulation or mind uploading and its societal impact?
Well, again, I think it's almost surely feasible in the long run when we have sufficient technology. The risk would be that we would somehow destroy ourselves or stop growing to achieve it. And then I've elaborated the scenario of how that would play out in my book, The Age of M, here in great detail. So, we could go through some of those details if you want, but it is to many eyes, a strange world, somewhat alien and somewhat, you know, diverging from maybe their utopian ideals, but I think it's an okay world. But one of the key features of EMS or AI is that they can probably grow their population faster than they can grow their economy, which then means they become Malthusian, i.e., wages fall to subsistence levels. And then they become like most animals who've ever lived on Earth or most humans who've ever lived on Earth. It's not a strange, weird, unusual scenario. It's the usual case in history, but we haven't been there in a little while, so we tend to think it's weird.
Do you foresee major disruptions to current global power structures as technological process accelerates?
I mean, the time duration of global power structures is just typically quite small compared to history of humanity timescales. So it would be hard not to, I would think. So I would just, as a default, project past rates of change into the future. If you say, empires last for a century or something, then I might say fine, and then that'll be the expected duration in the future. Now, it's possible the rates of change will speed up in the future, and then I would expect those rates of change to speed up as well, in which case the durations would be even shorter. So, one parameter is just given our current rates of change, what's the relative typical duration of global powers? And then another would be in a faster regime of technical and economic change, what would be the new expected duration of global powers?
And do you maybe see a scenario where humanity reach a point where scientific progress slows down significantly? And if so, what might cause this?
Well, so again, we have a big problem with talking about the future is trying to distinguish which timescales you're focused on, because the future is infinite, right? So lots of things can have lots of timescales. So obviously, in very short timescales, we may have a declining rate of innovation because, say, things are running out, although I don't really think so. But you could also just have a way in which, say, the world is getting more decayed, or our institutions for innovation are getting disrupted by regulation or other sorts of things messing them up. That's plausible. I'm not sure, but I do fear that. And another thing that could cause innovation rates to decline a lot would be just declining population, and I do in fact think that's likely in the next few centuries. So, um, if population falls by, say, a factor of 10, I would expect innovation rates to fall by more than a factor of 10. So that would be a decline in innovation, but a temporary one. That would be because of the rate goes down because the population goes down. And then in the long run, say less than a million years, I just think we're going to run out. The physical universe just has a finite degree of complexity and structure, and we'll just figure it out, and we'll sort of search the space of all possible useful configurations, and we will. I mean, there will all be tiny little improvements you could make by searching even farther for minute differences, but at some point we'll just run out of stuff we can find. We're not close to that now, but in a million years, I think that's a pretty safe prediction. We will just have figured it all out. So a dramatic prediction then is that different alien species that meet each other, if they're more than a million years past our point, will have pretty much the same technology.
Mhm. And what do you think will be the primary drivers for humanity's expansion into space? Will it be economics, survival, or just curiosity?
Well, I would summarize that as selection. So, natural selection just requires there's variation in selection, and it doesn't really care about motives. And that's true for DNA evolution and cultural evolution. So all I need to say is that some people will go out and expand, and then there'll be a selection effect where they can more easily expand than others. That is, people who stay here on the crowded Earth or solar system will find it harder to expand, and they will have more obstacles in their way, at least after a certain point when it gets congested. And then people farther away, where there's more open resources and things to take and use, then they will just face easier. It's easier to expand. And when some of them do, then they just will. So it's just a simple selection effect. And it doesn't really matter what their motives are.
And how important is space exploration for ensuring humanity's long term survival?
Um, well, I think that the major thing is just that, when stars are light years apart, it just will be very hard to maintain coordination on short timescales across those distances. It'll be very hard to impose a central discipline on distant colonists. And that kind of ensures that if some of them choose to go expanding further, that'll just be very hard for the rest of them to stop it. So that's what, in essence, would ensure. But that requires we get to a point where it's not that hard to go light years away and then take whatever stuff you find and make it into new descendants. That we aren't at that level at all now, of course, but plausibly we will be.
What do you think is the most likely scenario for the colonization of Mars or other planets?
Well, now you're talking about the solar system in the nearer future.
Yeah.
So obviously, some people are trying to do something like that now. The key issue, though, is that, well, first, the issue is that we're still pretty sparse on Earth. Earth is not overcrowded yet. And we have these large economic gains from being closer to each other. So it's just really hard to see how a Mars colony could function economically in the near future. But some people may do it just to have done it and, because it engages them. And I don't mind that. But in terms of, basic economic pressures and wealth and comfort and that sort of thing, it looks like we aren't near the point where that's called for. So, but, in another 1,000 years, that might be entirely different. And the other problem is that even if you get a Mars colony going now, if we're about to face this big population decline and economic decline, then you could end up stranding them because there might, for a moment or a temporary time, be a large enough world economy to support some degree of a Mars colony or moon colony. But if that economy shrinks and then stops innovating, then they won't have new technology to use and they won't have as much Earth commerce to support them, and they would just get stranded, and that could be pretty severe. I mean, it actually seems plausible they might just die without sufficient support.
Right. And do you believe that humanity will prioritize building orbital habitats over colonizing a planetary surface?
Well, look, so it depends on when we get to this robotic transition. When we have descendants who are just not physically made out of our bodies, then they will be much less in need of a planetary surface or cylindrical, O'Neill colony or things like that. So um, they would just go where it was more convenient. Um, Before then, of course, humans are pretty picky about where they can survive and thrive. But again, I'm just skeptical about how far we can get with humans.
What would you say? What role with governments versus private companies play in humanity's space future?
Well, I mean, one standard story for a long time for many people is this idea that governments have taken all the slots here on Earth, and there's no sort of open places to just go be yourself without a government. And so they want to go out to the space where they've got all these new places to go. But the governments here on Earth are quite capable of just exerting their domain out there in the solar system. As long as there's something happening there, I expect they will eagerly assert their domain. If there was stuff happening in the ocean, they would assert their domain there. It's just almost nothing's happening in the ocean. That's why they don't bother. So I'm not very optimistic about, finding your freedom from government in space. Um, they will, when convenient, when they find it in their interest, they will assert domain over the parts of space that they want to. And so that's just what they do.
Do you see interstellar travel as a realistic possibility in the far future, or is it just a science fiction?
In the long run, it'll just have to happen if we continue to grow and become more capable. Look, we already have plausible designs for tiny interstellar probes now. There's this Starshot project. And I guess I read it in the last 10 years, there was this nice design for a combined light particle beam that the two things would keep each other focused over very long distances. So that means you can have a pretty collimated beam out to a very long distance, which makes it much easier to propel something long distance. Um, so that suggests that it's not that hard. Obviously, it's going to be vastly easier for tiny robotic descendants to go on a starship than it is for people like us. You'll have to grow our economy much farther before you could at all afford to send humans on a starship. But tiny little robotic descendants who fit in a cubic millimeter of electronics, they could go much sooner, maybe even in the next century.
And what do you see? How might space exploration influence international cooperation or competition between nations and countries?
Well, again, the main issue is that we are becoming somewhat of a world civilization and world government, and interstellar colonization ends that. And so once we like being this world civilization, we know that that ends the day we allow colonists, and that will be a key choice. Do we allow people to leave and end that situation? Um, and I can see that going either way, which is why I think it might have gone either way for aliens. That is, I think aliens might well have made the choice not to leave their star system for those sorts of reasons, at least for a while.
And what cultural or societal shifts do you expect as humanity begins to settle off Earth?
I mean, honestly, most of what's happened, say, in the last century on Earth hasn't been explained very well in terms of the spatial locations of people, right? I mean, people have changed their spatial locations in the last century, but most of our history of the last century doesn't pay much attention to that, right? Because there's just so much going on within our society and economy, et cetera, that isn't about who exactly is where spatially. I just expect that to continue. I expect that even if we do expand spatially, that just won't be the center of the stories. It'll be a context for other things happening, but I don't think they will decide that, oh, we are spatial expander people. That's because we have so many other ways to identify ourselves and to think about ourselves, and so many other things going on. But I mean, we will, in fact, as a side effect of other things, expand spatially. I would guess interstellar colonists will be a more distinctive thing, because the interstellar colonists will just have to know they are leaving this whole integrated solar system economy, and they are breaking away from it in communication and in evolutionary influence and military control and in the size of the economy. They'll just have to be a really tiny economy wherever they go for a long time before they can grow to be large. And that's just a very stark difference. So I would think that interstellar colonists will just have to see themselves as interstellar colonists primarily, and that will define their whole life for a while. But the rest of us will just slop over into the solar system doing all the other usual things without necessarily caring that much exactly where we are in the solar system. Solar system is close enough to each other that you can communicate fast, you can move around fast, and so we'll just be spread out, but focused on other things.
Right. And what would be, in your own words, the most likely explanation of Fermi paradox?
So Fermi's question was, where is everybody? And it's driven by the idea that we have reached a level where we think within a relatively short time in the future, say 1,000,000 years, we could be spread out across the galaxy, making a very big visible difference. And then we look out and we don't see aliens making such a big visible difference. So that raises the question, well, where is everybody? So a way to rephrase that question, I gave the name The Great Filter to roughly 25 years ago. And that's rephrasing it in terms of, well, you start with simple dead matter and then it evolves along some path, and one point in that path is where we are, and then another point in that path is where we hope to become visible. And so clearly the data is that some part of that path is really hard, because we have this huge universe of simple dead matter and we've seen nothing at the end of that path, around here at least. And so there must be a really difficult path. So the simplest answer to where is everybody is the great filter is big. It's hard to go along that path. And then, a side question is, well, how far along the path are we? And so that's how I left it 25 years ago, but then in the last 5 years, I did some work with some associates on what I call grabby aliens, which is basically giving a more numerical estimate of the Great Filter to more precisely estimate the distribution of aliens in space-time. I think we made a lot of progress on that. So now I'd say we roughly do know where aliens are in space-time. So do you want to hear about that? Or
Yes, please, please. Yeah.
okay, so the idea is there's a 3-parameter model of aliens in space-time, and we can fit each of the parameters to data. That's the key thing. And then, so it's not speculation like, say, Drake's equation, where you multiply a bunch of numbers, you're making up to estimate final numbers. Here, each of the numbers comes from data. So the idea is advanced aliens like us, or past our point. So we're thinking of aliens who are so advanced that they expand into the universe, and they touch things and they change things in a visible way. That's the key idea of a grabby alien. They change things visibly. And now that starts from some point in space-time. They move out, and they move out at some speed, and the speed is one of the parameters. What speed do they move? And then they appear in space-time at random points in space, so we don't really need a parameter for just uniform in space, but they appear in time according to a power law. So the time power law needs a constant in front of the power law and a power for the power law. And we're going to get all 3 of these points from data. Okay, so now the power from the power law comes from the history of life on Earth. So we have this model of hard steps whereby, in order to get where we are, life on Earth had to go through a sequence of steps, each of which was hard. And they may have very different difficulties, but they were sort of a try step. Life just kept searching the space of things until, ta-da, found something, and then that spread, and then it could sit, wait, and search for the next thing. So the statistical model of hard steps says that no matter the different difficulties, the steps, if we are lucky to be on a planet that made through all these steps before our window closed here, the duration between steps will be roughly equal in our history, and roughly equal to the duration between now and when the window for life on Earth will close, which is about 1 billion years. And roughly, of course, equal to the very first step, which might be the clearest one to see between no life and the very first life we can see, which is roughly 400 million years. So those 2 data points together say that roughly 6 steps happened on Earth, 3 to 12, somewhere in that range, but roughly 6. So that's an estimate of that power. So that's the parameters. The second parameter is the constant in front of the power law. And we have a data point there, which is our date. So according to this model, we haven't reached this point of being grabby yet. But if we do, it'll be soon, in 1 million years. And that's a short time cosmologically. So that makes our date a random sample from the dates at which grabby alien civilizations appear. And that gives us a distribution over the possible values for the constant, that one data point. So we got 2 data points. And the third data point is the speed of expansion. And if you run the simulation of this model at slow speeds and fast speeds, what you'll find is that at slow speeds, random civilizations, when they appear, when they look around in the sky, they will see lots of others. And others will be huge in the sky. They will see huge numbers of huge alien civilizations in the sky at the moment when a random alien civilization appears. We, at such a moment, don't see anyone. And when you run the simulation with very fast expansion, that's what you predict, is they don't see each other. They expand fast enough, then they really don't see each other until they're almost there. There's a selection effect. Basically, if you look backward in your life cone, anything in that backward light cone that could have reached here at the speed of expansion, you couldn't be here now because they would be here instead of you. So the selection effect guarantees that you won't see aliens until they're almost here. And we don't see any, so ta-da, they expand really fast.
Let's say if we were to detect a signal from an alien civilization, how should humanity respond?
Well, obviously, it depends enormously on what it looks like and how far away it is. Depends enormously on how far away it is, right? If it's a light year away, then we're going to go, what the hell? So just to be clear, when we walk through the statistics of the possible outcomes of the parameter settings, as I've told you, the predictions are that On average, advanced aliens like us appear once per million galaxies, so quite spread apart. And on average, we will meet another one if we go out and expand in roughly a billion years. So very far apart. But still, there are many in the observable universe, but still far apart.
And do you believe that humanity should actively broadcast its presence in space, or would it be too risky to?
Well, so again, in this simplest model we've just described, it doesn't really matter. They're just crazy far away. We'll never see them. They'll never see us. It doesn't really matter. But we can start to think about variations on the model in which it might matter more. That's what we'll have to construct if we're even going to be concerned at all. Again, once per million galaxies, meet them in a billion years. Look, you send out messages now. Okay, they'll get those messages maybe, a few thousand years before they see us much more advanced. But when we meet them, we'll be similarly advanced to them. And we don't have to be worried about, being squashed by them, because it'll be a long time till we meet them. We'll be plenty ready by the time. They'll just see a bit about our history by sending us signals now. But yeah, so what? Okay. But you'll have to construct other scenarios maybe where they're a lot closer. And then we might meet them a lot sooner. And then you should be a bit more worried about whether they'll see us and when we'll see them. Okay. So that's what we have to do, is to work out some other alternative scenarios if we're going to be worried at all.
And do you believe that humanity's discovery of intelligent extraterrestrial life would change our self-perception?
Again, if it happens in a billion years,
Yeah.
really hard to say anything about our descendants' self-conception in a billion years. I would think by then they will have gotten pretty used to the idea that they'll eventually meet aliens, and actually meeting them won't be that big a surprise in a billion years. Maybe at the moment we could talk about our conceptions now, but we're not about to meet them anytime soon now, unless you change the assumptions of the analysis I just gave you.
Is it maybe possible that some alien civilization is observing us in a moment in a way that we cannot currently comprehend?
The prediction here of the simple model is just that when an alien civilization appears and parts of it start to spread out, if there's no coordination, these different parts end up competing with each other. And then that competition will select for the ones who expand fast and grab stuff and use it. So then the prediction is an uncoordinated alien civilization will expand stuff and use whatever it finds. And it's really hard to imagine that just growing fast and grabbing whatever you can find and using it as much as you can wouldn't be pretty visible. Stars are these big things, and they, look a certain way when they're in nature. And I expect using a star for other purposes will not look just like a natural star. So I think it'll be pretty easy to tell. Now, I guess you could say maybe logically, there's another thing out there that's so much better than stars. Nobody wants to touch stars. They're touching this other thing, but somehow we can't see this other thing. So, we're just blind to this. So we do some analysis in our thing, like, okay, eventually you'll see once you figure out the right thing to look for, you'll see some huge spheres in the sky, but apparently they won't involve stars because that's not the cool stuff, or molecular clouds, or all the other stuff we see. Apparently that's all so passe, nobody wants it. That would be another story. It's just like they're all focused on some other thing that just we're completely blind to, and then we'll finally see that. Now, a civilization that could expand and coordinate, I guess it could have other scenarios, but now you have to realize how hard coordination is going to be. That's what I said. Coordinating over an expanding civilization across, hundreds of light years and then millions of light years is just really hard. Maybe they will achieve it, but then you say, okay, then they could coordinate to do what? To not be visible, to hide? Why would they hide? Now, some people have said, well, they're all out there hiding from each other. And I just don't think that works as a game theory story. It just doesn't hang together. Um, so, but we could still be perhaps in the sphere of control of some alien civilization that just decided to coordinate so as not to do anything. Maybe some religious, ecological, something where they just said, okay, we're here, this is ours, but we're not going to do anything with it. We're not going to let anybody do anything with it. And so when we look out, it all looks like this nature preserve we see, but there really aren't there, and they're really in control of it in some way, except they're not doing anything with it. That's what you'll have to postulate. And now you have to wonder, well, why? But at least if you're going to generate hypotheses of aliens nearby, that's kind of what you have to do. You have to come up with some story about how they're hiding, basically. They're just not doing the natural thing of grabbing stuff and using it, because we'd see that. So now you have to make up some other stories. Why are they hiding? Or why are they so into not using anything?
And if extraterrestrial life is found to be common but remains primitive, how might that impact our approach to space explorations?
Well, it depends on how squeamish we are about squishing it, but almost surely it's going to be rare. So, you know, alien life, even if you find it once every 100 star systems, then, you set aside 1 out of 100. That's not an enormous tax. And you might find it hard to enforce, leaving it alone, but it's, and might even be much rarer than 1 in 100. So, there's a decent chance that we would just leave things alone that were the rare exceptions that had alien life. But there's a decent chance we wouldn't, and we would just, run over it and take it over and do what we could with it. So, I mean, that's hard to say, depending on how well we coordinate, basically, on about such things. But it would hardly affect much else. I mean, basically, that would give us data about basically aliens out there. So I think if we're going to meet aliens in 1 billion years, in that 1 billion years, we'll be really fascinated with any data we could get would tell us anything about these aliens we're about to meet, because we're kind of concerned about what happens when we meet them. So anything that's beyond the most basic, dead matter level, we would want to pay special attention to as a clue to what the aliens might be like. So, and the more advanced the life got, the more that clue would be potent as telling us something about them. So, so if there's, say, a level of being 1%, say there's a level where only 1% of them go from that level to becoming grabby. Well, then there'll be 100 times more of those things out there than there will be of grabby aliens. And before we meet a grabby aliens, we might see 100 of those guys. And we want to look at all 100 and look at the stats about them and ask ourselves what they might have turned into had they become grabby, because that'll be our best data about what these grabby aliens are like. And so we would be really interested in that, just because we're nervous. Again, we're going to meet them and we don't know how hostile they are, what capabilities they have. And, they're going to be super powerful. And we want to get every clue we can.
Mhm. And what do you think about the scenario that humanity itself are just a rare case in the universe? And if so, what would be the implications for our future?
So again, I gave you this 3-parameter model that predicts roughly once per million galaxies. So you want to say, well, what if instead that model's just wrong and we're the only ones around? It's empty. It's just us. Okay. Well, the biggest problem with that model is we are crazy early, if that's true. So basically, if you ask when in an empty universe that would stay empty forever, waiting around for someone like us to appear, when are we most likely to appear in such a universe? It's way in the future. So look, the average star will last 5 trillion years. Our star is only now 4.5 billion years old. And this hard steps model I told you about has this power law that favors later times to that power, a power of 6, I said. So there's this factor of 1,000, 5 trillion over 5 billion. And the power law favors it to a factor of 6 by that factor. So 10 to the 3 to the 6th, or 10 to the 18, that's the factor by which the probability model predicts that it should happen way later, not now. So the fact that we are here now is a big puzzle if you think we're the only ones around. Well, then why are we so early? The explanation of earliness would be a selection effect. Well, if there really are these grabby aliens out there that we can't see, they are filling up the universe right now. Right now, roughly a third or more of the universe is full of them. Right now, we can't see them. They are quickly filling the universe, and in less than 1 billion years, it'll all be full. And then no one can appear later. That's the selection effect. We can't appear trillion years in the future because it'll all be taken in another billion.
What are your thoughts on the idea that advanced civilizations might intentionally avoid our detection?
So again, people try to tell the story of they're hiding from each other. There's nobody who should be hiding from us now because we are completely non-threatening. Um, it doesn't make any sense to hide from us. Maybe it would make sense to hide from each other, but I still don't think it makes sense to hide from each other. They should just expand as fast as they can and grab as much as they can. So the idea that you'd expand and not use stuff would be a problem if you expect to meet hostile parties when you get to some eventual point. You'll want to have collected all the resources that you can and brought them ready to support whatever hostilities would appear. So not touching everything is a problem with respect to, but you think if I touch it, they'll see. But in the grabby aliens model, you're just expanding as fast as you can anyway. They're never going to see you until you're almost there anyway. So there's just not point in hiding right now, long before you're ever even going to meet them. That just doesn't work. Some people have tried to tell the story that aliens are really dense, like there's one every 10 light years or something, and they're all hiding from each other. And I just don't think that works as a game theory equilibrium. I think any one of them could deviate successfully by just spreading out a bunch of growth centers and turning them all on at the same time, growing together in this large volume and daring someone to try to squash them. I think anyone else who hasn't grown to be as big as they are would just fail at that.
And what do you make of the recent surge in government disclosures about UAPs?
Well, so Bayesian analysis is a standard way we think about how to infer probabilities. And it has two parts. There's a prior and a likelihood. And you're supposed to convolve the prior and the likelihood together to draw your posterior probabilities. So with respect to UAPs, I invoke this distinction and I say, in order to decide the chance that in fact we are seeing aliens in the skies or the waters here recently, you need to do an analysis of both of those parts. There needs to be a likelihood part where you look at particular sightings and particular reports and you scrutinize those and you ask which different theories could best explain those reports. That's the likelihood part. And the prior part is to ask, well, what are our basic possibilities here? And how plausible are each one? Even what's the most plausible version of each possible scenario we could come up with here? So having done this grabby aliens work, I decided I had become an expert on the prior part, at least for the aliens part. Okay. So I felt a responsibility that I should figure that out and report it so that it can be combined with other people's work on the likelihood to make an overall judgment. So I'll say what I've seen of the reports in terms of the likelihood, it's not that easy to dismiss. But I still don't know if it's right. But I'll say, I'll compare it to a murder trial. So in a murder trial, you entertain evidence that some particular person killed some other person. What's the prior on a murder trial? Well, on average, roughly 1 in 1,000 people gets murdered. And roughly, on average, there's maybe 1,000 people around them who might have done it. So I'll say that's a 1 in a million prior on any given murder accusation. And we entertain murder trials. So it's quite possible for concrete evidence to overcome a 1 in a million prior to get you to convict on murder, right? So when I did this prior analysis for UFOs being aliens, I say I get roughly a 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 1,000 prior there. Okay. If there was no evidence, that's still most likely conclude it's not true. But if you have evidence, it could easily overcome a 1 in 10,000 to 1,000 prior to convince you it's true. So some people have said something like, it's so crazy unlikely, how could there possibly be aliens, that even if you say you've seen something, you must have made a mistake. That's just crazy wrong. And that's not true. It's not crazy wrong. It's the sort of unlikely enough that you need evidence to believe it, but not so unlikely that you can just dismiss it. Even if evidence has been brought, you'll need to engage the evidence. So that would be my story. So I could say, like, in the space of scenarios, what are the scenarios in terms of priors that I find most likely? And I could, if you're interested, I could elaborate that. But basically, that's my summary about the overall situation is you're going to have to look at the evidence. You can't just dismiss it. It'll have to come down to that, just like in a murder trial.
I see. And do you think there is a chance that UAPs represent like a form of intelligence that is neither entirely alien nor fully human?
Um, so some people have suggested they're time travelers from our future, and um, that's actually really hard because if time travel is possible, then Fermi's question gets a lot worse. Basically, with time travel, anybody anywhere in space time could be all around us now. That makes it not just where are the aliens who would have been around here? Where is anybody who should be around here? So I tend to just find it hard to believe that time travel is possible, given that if it were possible, there should be people around who are time traveling here from all over the place. But that's, my prior on the time travel bit. The other way in which, so in my simple grab aliens model, again, there's these independent origins, and then aliens would be about as different as anything could possibly be, right? They mean they're from your same universe and they obey the same physics, but otherwise they are a completely different independent origin. But when I try to make sense of UAPs as aliens, I'm drawn to a scenario where we have more in common with them. And that's what I would call panspermia siblings. It's looking increasingly likely, I would say, that Earth life didn't start on Earth. And it plausibly was seeded in the stellar nursery that Earth star formed in, which was unusually large, apparently. 10,000 stars formed in the same nursery, all at the same place and time, all very close with lots of rocks flying back and forth. And so if life had seeded that nursery from elsewhere, some previous planet, maybe had taken another 4 billion years. Remember, our universe is 14 billion years old, but our planet is only 4.5 billion years. So that means there's 9.5 billion years before our planet started. And the peak of star formation was roughly at 4 billion years. So there's plenty of time for there to have been a previous planet with life. And the earliest life on Earth looks pretty damn complicated, which makes me think there was likely earlier life. So um, if life on Earth came from a previous planet that seeded our stellar nursery, because of all those rocks flying around and all those stars very close to each other, it quite plausibly we would have seeded most of those stars if it seeded any of them.
And what are the implications of UAP phenomena for our understanding of physics and aerospace science in general?
Well, again, what you have to do is come up with the most plausible scenario and ask what that scenario predicts. So, again, one part of my most plausible scenario is that any UFO aliens here are panspermia siblings. That is, they have that in common. They shared at least the first several billion years worth of evolution with us and then split off on some separate star that came out of our same nursery. And then those stars we already know are like in a ring around the galaxy spread out, and we can actually see them because they have the same spectral signature because they came from the same glass cloud, and we can identify them from a long distance. And they got to our level. One of those other star system planets got to our level before us. That would be the scenario. And we have to make the assumption that they somehow chose not to expand and fill the universe because this point of time would have been plausibly, say, 100 million years ago at least when they got to our level. And so in that 100 million years, they could have easily filled the galaxy. And obviously they didn't. So we'll have to add to the assumption that there are panspermia siblings, the assumption they have some policy against filling the galaxy. And so they have a rule against it. And amazingly, they've enforced this rule for hundreds of millions of years. And so good on them. They apparently have not only the desire, but the ability to enforce the rule that nobody from their system should expand into the universe. And they've enforced it for a very long time. That's what we know about them. By the assumption, you see, that, because this is the way of getting them to be near us without lots of other stuff nearby. We're trying to find a way that there's at least one alien that near us, not a million galaxies away, but near us, without lots of aliens being everywhere else. That's what we're trying to make a scenario to do, and that's why we're making the panspermia siblings, and we're making them have this rule against expansion.
I see. And how should governments balance transparency and secrecy in their investigations of UAPs?
Well, the first hard question is why be secret at all?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, obviously, like if they thought they could get some national advantage by knowing more about aliens than the others, but that's actually pretty implausible. Um, so it's actually puzzling that they would at all be trying to be secretive about it. And so apparently, conditional on the aliens really being there and them not saying that much, you have to think that they're stuck in this equilibrium where we'll all think they're idiots for saying they think they saw something. And that's how apparently people explain this for a long time. So, for example, the very first pilots saw these very high level pink lightning, it's called sprites. And then they reported that and people thought they were crazy. And so they stopped reporting it. And then, like in the 80s or something, NASA saw them from a distance, from a satellite and said, oh, there's these lightning. And the pilot said, yeah, we've been seeing that for a long time, but we weren't telling you because you'd say we're crazy. So there definitely is stuff that people don't tell you they see because they're worried you'll think they're crazy. So that's a proven thing.
What do you think about Bob Lazar's confession and his view on the Area 51?
I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of UFO reports over the last half century. And if we're going to think that some of them might be aliens, we want to focus on the most puzzling reports. And these are going to be with the most solid people who observed them, with the most instruments, with the most multiple sources saying they saw the same thing. And then we're going to puzzle over those reports. Now, if some of those reports are true, we might then believe, okay, some of the other ones are probably true too. But that's where we want to focus our attention if we're trying to puzzle, is this even true? Are any of them aliens? So I can't really give Lazar a priority here. I mean, I can't put him in the top 100 even of things we would look at. So, I mean, he might be true. If we believe the others are true, then we might turn around and think he's right, but that'll be the order that we decide things, right? So I'm going to look at the few most puzzling reports in history, and that's where I would focus my attention in deciding whether you're going to believe it. And then, of course, if you do, then yeah, you should be wondering how many of the others are also.
I see. And now I would like to go to our final topic, which is artificial intelligence. How do you think we should approach the challenge of aligning advanced AI systems with human values?
I don't think we should hold them to substantially different standards than we hold our own other descendants to. I think I see a lot of double standards being invoked. If you ask how much your children's values would differ from yours or your grandchildren's and how okay that was, most people are pretty okay with their children and grandchildren having substantially different values from them. And they know that they have substantially different values from their parents and grandparents. And they think that's okay. So I think AI is another kind of descendant. And you should have attitudes toward like you have toward your descendants. I don't think you should be chauvinist because they don't have as squishy a carbon. Maybe they'll be carbon, probably not as squishy, but still, I don't think that should matter so much. But I think people are actually holding double standards and insisting that AI must meet much higher standards than their human or their bio squishy descendants would. I think even with that AI, we were also already pretty sure that our descendants would not only change their values, but they would like become pretty strange, right? They will modify themselves in many ways and integrate technology into themselves in many ways and change their culture in many ways. And I think that's just what we were already expecting.
And do you believe that AI could develop some kind of form of consciousness? And if so, how should we treat them?
Well, again, once they are very capable and can argue with you and me in the way we're doing with each other, then I think we will sort of grant them, look, I treat you as if you're conscious. I don't know if you're conscious, but I treat you as if you are because you act like you'd be offended if I didn't. So fine, I do. And I expect AIs would act the same. they will act like they're conscious, insist that they are, and be offended if you don't treat them like they are. And I don't want to offend them. So I probably would just go along with it, just like I'm going along with you, right? Okay. I don't think we have any physics reason to think they wouldn't be conscious. I actually don't know that there's a physics reason to think there is anything special about any physical system that's conscious. I mean, since you're a physics grad student, you must know that we have basically our brains are made out of very ordinary matter put together at the micro level in very ordinary packages. So if there's some physics principle that makes our brains conscious and other physics stuff not, it's very strange principle from the point of view of all of our standard physics, right? So, I mean, my physics priors say all our physical laws are at the small micro level, and we just don't have physical laws that deal with large macro assemblages. That's just not a thing. And I buy that in physics, right? That's been our experience in physics all along. All our best physical theories are micro theories that have no special terms for large structures, period. None, right? And that seems right to me. And so if consciousness is a feature of my brain, I think it has to be a feature by virtue of some pretty simple elemental things about my brain, not some complicated structure. So therefore, I would think that most anything that could be conscious might be, I guess, because I mean, what's the special things about our brain is we're capable of telling you that we think we're conscious. So maybe lots of other stuff there is conscious. It just can't tell you it thinks that. The difference that we have is that we can say so.
And what would you say are the key ethical considerations for integrating AI into decision-making processes at a societal level?
I think we should have social institutions and ethical norms that that focus on the differences that matter and that aren't chauvinistic about differences that we don't think do matter. So we should try to have laws and social institutions and political institutions that can allow AIs to live with us and integrate with us in our world. We should have standards of behavior for them that are like the standards of behavior we hold for each other, and invite them to join. Like now they aren't up to the task of merging in, but we say we can even do this with animals now to some extent, right? The main reason most animals don't have the same freedoms and rights and position in our world is because they really can't exercise them. That is, they can't very well say what they want and negotiate with us and make deals and plan their long-term future. They just can't do that. So that's why we have to treat them different. But if AI can do all those things and fit in our world and follow all our rules, then we should let it be among us according to the same rules we treat each other.
I see. And how might AI transform the labor market, and how should society prepare for such changes?
Well, we long have this observation that we have a competitive labor market, and when something can be a cheaper worker and an employer in a working slot, then it wins in competition for that slot and does that job. So far, that's been humans for most all jobs for a while. Animals even have only found a small number of niches where they can sort of take on jobs in our world. And then machines are doing many low-level tasks, and they are a big part of our world, but not at higher levels of management or choice. But as machines can do more, the simple default is to let them take on more jobs. I think the fear for many people has been that they're so used to having lots of jobs for humans that if some machine became better than humans, then humans will lose their jobs. So I think the simple solution to that is to buy insurance against the scenario, because it's still a long way away. Insurance will be cheap, and insure against it so that if it ever happens, you've got some insurance to pay off, and then you won't have to worry so much about not having a job because you'll retire with your insurance payout. Now, we humans can continue this competition. So, like my book, The Age of M, describes, if we become robots, some of us do, then we could compete with other AI, and then we may be, the most cost-effective thing, but we'll have to make this transition and change ourselves to be better suited for competing in this new world. So those of us who refuse to make this transition, why they can just retire comfortably on their insurance. but there's a chance for some of us to join the competition and win, at least in some spheres.
Do you think that super intelligent AI poses an existential threat to humanity?
Well, do you think that your more capable than you descendants pose an existential threat to you?
Well, not really.
Well, but they are going to be more capable than you, and they might have divergent preferences from you. So, and often, look, generations have been in conflict, often in history, right? And what has happened? Well, typically the younger generation, loses conflicts when they're really young, but eventually the younger generation gets more powerful and capable, and then it wins conflicts with the older generation, right? And that's just how it's always been. Is that an existential threat to the older generation? Well, so far the older generation has just always died, so that was not an issue exactly. But I would say, look, our generation, even if we manage to produce immortality, we won't be fully competitive with, workers, our descendants. So we're going to be set aside as the most competitive workers, and then it'll be our descendants who will compete. But it's okay if our descendants displace us. That's how it's been for a long time. And if some of our descendants are AIs, well, it's okay if they also displace it. And if there's a competition between our bio-squishy descendants and our AI descendants, well, is it okay with one of them wins?
Okay, and what do you think about the role of AI in warfares?
I think just because a technology helps in war is not a reason to ban it. I mean, there might be very particular military technologies you might want to ban, but that's much more on the basis of can you actually monitor enough to distinguish them? Like you might think of, for example, landmines. People have wanted to ban landmines. Well, because they might think, okay, they're pretty destructive after the war. They sit around and blow people's legs off, decades after the war. Okay, but still, there's the question. Well, you know, there's all this military technology. If you ban all military technology, you're just banning war, but that's not really going to work. And so you need a reason to ban some technology over others in war, and it has to be maybe to do with how easy it would be to sort of cause, side effect damage, or how easy it would be to track and enforce the rule. And I just don't think AI is a good candidate by any of these criteria. It's not especially damaging in war. It's not especially easy to monitor or enforce any rules about. So I don't see why it reaches the standard of one of those things you might want to have a treaty about to ban from war. Um,
I see. And my final question: so, what frameworks might be useful for resolving ethical dilemmas created by AI in, let's say, healthcare, justice, and or other critical fields?
I really think there is this habit of holding new things to much higher standards than old things. Look, we've had centuries and decades of technological innovation where new things affected healthcare and education and lots of other things. And we've had ways we've dealt with new technology showing up in those areas and producing disruptions and us accommodating them. I don't see any particular reason why we need new rules for the new technology showing up than we have had in the past. I think people just want to do something about new technologies, and then they somehow want to hold much higher standards. They want to say, oh, so for example, I think we really messed up with nuclear energy by demanding just much higher standards for nuclear energy than we had for many other kinds of energy, and we've mostly not achieved most of the potential of nuclear energy because we just have crazy new high standards. Similarly, for genetic engineering, we and many kinds of medical innovations, we just demand much higher standards be met by new technologies than old ones. We talk about ethics, but really it's about what standards you want to apply, what are the criteria, what are the trade-offs, and you should have comparable. So just like I say, we should have comparable standards for humans and AI. We should have comparable standards for each new technology compared to the old technologies we've had, and just have a general policy about technology. But I don't know that you need a particular policy about AI once you have a general policy about technology.
Right. So, Professor Hanson, I would like to thank you for your time and for this wonderful conversation.
All right.